There's a lady who's sure all that we do is wrong, and she's asking to speak to the manager. When she asks where they're at because someone made her mad, her voice will be raised up in anger. And she says that her name isn't Karen. We all have concerns. We all have issues which we feel need to be addressed. We all have times when we think that others aren't listening to us. But there is a certain kind of personality out there who seems bent on making life more difficult for everyone else. The concern troll. Nicknamed Karen, concern trolls busy themselves with moral purity and other aspects of the way things ought to be, at least from their perspective. They police customer service to the regret of businesses everywhere. They police how schools are run, convinced that their little darlings are truly special and need special accommodations. They police language, pointing out the problematic status of every statement they come across. And they police access to social media and related applications. Karen the Concern Troll has become a common problem both on and off social media. Karen demands customer service, even if the business doesn't actually provide those services. Karen parents by the snowplow method and is a card-carrying member of the Snowplow Parents Association. Karen is the president of her homeowners association and never misses a chance to tell you that your grass needs to be cut, that your sprinklers have been on too long, or that your mailbox is 6 inches too tall. Karen polices the language of the world, telling people that they cannot say things. Problematic is her favorite word. In short, Karen is a menace. Like her teenage daughter Courtney, who is busy listing off all of the reasons why people who don't support socialism are MAGA-hatted idiots, she launches into ranting diatribes about how disrespectful other people are. Like her mother Janet, who is convinced that we live in a system of intersecting discriminations, she wants to silence anyone that she calls a fascist and is willing to silence and deplatform others to do it while complaining about the suppression of her free speech. Karen is not alone either. There are thousands of concern trolls like her, doing their best to reshape the world in their own image and willing to ruin lives to do it. Karen used to be a local problem a couple decades ago. She raised her concerns back then, too, but the police in her area knew her by name and kept her from doing too much harm. The school officials listened politely and then ignored her self-serving suggestions. The businesses simply asked for her not to come back and didn't worry about losing the rest of their customer base. But as social media rose to prominence as a virtual public square, Karen's reach rose to international prominence. Over 3 billion active users are on Facebook, a number greater than a third of the world's population. Karen absolutely loves Facebook. Where else can she post edicts from the SPPA, the HOA, and her favorite vegan recipes all at once? But Karen doesn't like that people can post altered videos on Facebook, so she activated the brigades of concern trolls to trigger an ad boycott. After a month and 1,100 advertisers pulling their ads off of the platform, Facebook posted $18.69 billion in quarterly revenues, much higher than the previous quarter. That doesn't stop Karen, though. She rampages all over the site, posting concern troll reviews about local businesses who aren't up to her standards. Whether it's someone who isn't wearing a mask inside their store, or just a failure on the employees' parts to deliver unreasonable service demands to her, Karen trashes them on social media and then acts shocked by the responses she gets from the businesses, other Facebook users, and even her employer. Facebook has a Karen problem. Karen is posting those scathing business reviews, and that may open Facebook up to liability from the businesses which are getting concern trolled into bankruptcy court. Like other social media platforms, Facebook is part of the digital public square. Publishing demonstrably false information about someone else in the public square is defamation. And unless Karen's target is a public figure, Karen is liable to lawsuits for damages. If Facebook allows Karen to get away with concern trolling, then Facebook may also be liable since they are already fact-checking and otherwise curating their content. The risk is lower for Facebook, though, since Facebook's curation efforts have been limited principally to removing illegal activities and content blatantly in violation of their terms of service. Twitter may only have 330 million active users, but don't let its size fool you. People all over the world check their Twitter feeds many times a day. Karen knows this and loves how many people she can reach on Twitter with her tweets, especially since tweets are used more and more as content for legacy media outlets. But Karen also complains to Twitter about tweets all the time. Any tweets that she finds offensive, anyone who supports something she thinks is deplorable, and especially anyone who calls her out for her constant attempts to police morality and speech on the platform, gets reported to Twitter. What's more, Karen calls upon the concerned troll brigades to file simultaneous claims. Twitter, swamped by the reports and just as sick of dealing with them as anyone else is, has adjusted their terms of service to remind people that they will remove content, block content, and even suspend accounts over things that annoy Karen. Why? Because deleting Karen's account would be more trouble than banning 100 accounts by other users. Karen would make sure of it, so Twitter has a Karen problem. Now, Twitter has already run into problems limiting the accounts of politicians, for which they had to publish a policy that they would not remove the content of public officials. That didn't keep them from deciding to fact-check tweets, though, and label those tweets as containing questionable information or manipulated media. Since their most prominent user is Donald Trump, and Trump's official account has triggered Twitter's algorithms repeatedly, Twitter has managed to rouse the president's ire. Not a good thing for Twitter's business, is it? Especially not when the FCC and the FTC are looking into clarifying exactly what protections from liability Section 230 will provide, and what actions will result in platforms losing those protections. YouTube is another platform which is struggling with concern trolling. With over 2 billion active users, YouTube has become more than just a place where people can post videos of their kids' birthday parties. Millions of people go to YouTube instead of legacy media to get their news and entertainment, which means that, like Facebook and Twitter, YouTube has a Karen problem. Because YouTube didn't want to deal with Karen, they changed their terms of service for the platform and their qualifications for the AdSense Partners program. I expect that Karen was pleased initially. She became less amused, though, when YouTube reprogrammed their algorithms. Many channels which Karen actually liked disappeared or were demonetized. Algorithms, after all, are just computer programs, and computers have always been governed by the same principle. Garbage in, garbage out. Software makes no subjective judgments. It can't. Computers aren't sentient, and no software is complex enough to make morality-based decisions. Now, thanks to a long history of systemic abuses of their own terms of service, YouTube is dangerously close to facing the perfect storm in court: antitrust violations. Karen and the concerned troll brigades have hit monetization platforms too. It makes sense that they did, considering that Karen tries to get users barred from using AdSense and other profit-sharing programs if she can't get the users booted off of social media altogether. Nowhere is this more apparent than at Patreon. Formed to provide a subscription service for online creators, Patreon has become the leading platform for paid subscription processing. It has also, unfortunately, been bending the knee to concern trolls for a long time. Karen has already reached credit card transaction processors like Stripe, who don't want to mess with her complaining any more than anyone else. Stripe refuses to process payments for people whom the concern trolls have deemed problematic. Some of these people may be problematic and some may not, but they get barred from using Stripe anyway. If Stripe doesn't process those payments, then Patreon can't do business with those user accounts. Patreon has a Karen problem. Patreon has another problem: their terms of service and binding arbitration. Under Patreon's terms, users have to bring disputes with Patreon to Patreon first for resolution. If the problem cannot be resolved, the terms of service requires Patreon's users to enter binding arbitration instead of filing lawsuits. Now, just to be clear, the terms of service is actually a contract between the user and the platform. If Patreon users file suit, it can be argued that they are in material breach of contract, or at least Patreon is going to make that argument in court. Most judges won't consider a contract null and void until and unless the contract contains illegal stipulations, and a binding arbitration clause is perfectly legal, but that provision may just ruin Patreon financially anyway. Several Patreon users, including some prominent YouTubers, have demanded arbitration over Patreon shutting down their accounts. The binding arbitration is paid for by whichever party is deemed to be at fault, and Patreon has been interrupting the revenue streams of some very prominent creators. Creators who, by the way, generated thousands if not tens of thousands of dollars in transactions every single month. 15% of $10,000 is small potatoes to a company like Patreon, but the other $8,500, which would have gone to the creator generating those transactions, is a significant amount of monthly income. Karen may yet succeed in deplatforming creators she doesn't like if Patreon is declared at fault and forced to pay those users for their lost income and for the arbitration. Creators and their patrons have demanded that arbitration, and Patreon foolishly presented their current terms of service as the terms which applied when they banned those users, despite recently changing them. They were caught at it, and they were called out on it by the arbitrator. I can't think of a faster way to lose a case in binding arbitration than to lie to the arbitrator. Once the first decision goes against them, Patreon is likely to wind up losing most of the related and similar cases, and that may just bankrupt the company. But why does Karen and the brigade of concerned trolls do these things? Well, the secret is in their name, although it may not be obvious. A concerned troll wants control. Think about it. Over and over again, all of the unreasonable demands, ridiculous rules, and outraged reporting is an attempt to exercise control over Karen's world. She doesn't like a politician, so she tries to force them out of office. She also tries to silence his or her supporters and interfere with fundraising efforts. She doesn't like the customer service that she received, so she tries to scare customers away from the business. She doesn't like the report cards her kids bring home to her, so she tries to force the school to change curriculum and make special accommodations for her children. She doesn't like the content she sees on social media, so she tries to defund the creators, cripple advertising revenues, force other users off of the platforms, and even destroy some platforms entirely. Concerned trolls want control because they need to feel in control. Perhaps there are circumstances in their lives over which they have no control, and that makes them feel helpless. Perhaps they have past experiences which traumatize them, and they need to make sure in their mind that those situations cannot happen again. Whatever the motivation, it's about asserting control in their chaotic world. Do I understand what motivates Karen? Yep. Does that absolve Karen's behavior? No. Just no. These behaviors are unacceptable. They are destructive to both concerned trolls and the people they are concerned trolling. They make it more difficult to address real issues. This isn't just because of the distraction that concerned trolling creates. It's also because concerned trolling increases apathy to every issue, both real and imagined. Concerned trolling also contributes to the serious issues which social media companies are facing. The adjusted terms of service and questionable curation of websites are effectively an adoption of concerned trolling as curation policy. It's putting these companies at risk of serious liability. The government is already considering changes to Section 230, which will remove the protections for social media platforms because of their concerned trolling curation. Patreon is at risk of losing a lot of money in arbitration already, and might just be driven into bankruptcy over the payouts. Could Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Stripe be far behind, especially when they interfere with a user's income? Suppressing content and preventing financial transactions both potentially fall under tortious interference. Withholding access to profit-sharing programs without explanation may constitute promissory estoppel, which is actionable in court. Only the Section 230 protections prevent creators who have lost or been denied access to platforms and profit-sharing programs from filing suit against those platforms for promissory estoppel, and those protections may disappear soon. Oops! Contrary to what she may believe, it's not Karen's world. Following Karen's lead isn't a good idea. And she screams that her name isn't Karen.